The universe was walled. On the besieged world of Lyra, the wall was a thing of impossible beauty and absolute despair, a shimmering curtain of light that draped the heavens. It was the quarantine, the work of the architects, a species so ancient and powerful they were less a civilization and more a fundamental law of physics. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They simply imposed order. Inside this celestial prison, the Lumen, a people of gentle scholars and artists, were being erased. Their cage mates, the Vex, hung in Lyra's orbit like a swarm of biomechanical locusts. The Vex were not conquerors in any traditional sense. They did not seek territory or tribute. They were harvesters. Their ships, jagged constructs of living metal and pulsating organic matter, would descend upon Lumen cities not with bombs, but with assimilation nanites that rewrote life at the genetic level, turning libraries, homes, and people into gray, screaming slurry that was then siphoned into the fleet's nutrient vats. In a hidden archive deep beneath the crystalline spires of the capital, Kalen, the last archivist of his kind, knelt before a humming console. His slender fingers, evolved for calligraphy and delicate instrument calibration, trembled as they danced across the interface. He was initiating a forbidden technology, a quantum entanglement communicator that would tear a microscopic, instantaneous hole through the fabric of the quarantine, a single scream into the uncaring void. He poured his people's soul into the signal, the terror of watching a civilization die, the hymns of their lost generation, the scientific marvel of their own biology. The Lumen possessed a unique genetic trait, an ability to perceive the subtle, cosmic folds in space-time, a biological key that could unlock true instantaneous travel. It was this gift that had made them a target for the Vex, who sought to assimilate the trait and weaponize it for their ravenous expansion. Kalen's message was a Hail Mary, a prayer cast into an abyss, a final, desperate hope that somewhere beyond the beautiful, deadly wall, someone was listening. Far across the galactic arm, in a sector of space most civilized races had written off as a cosmic dead end, the signal found its ear. It arrived at the Edge, a heavily armed human listening post bolted onto a rogue asteroid that drifted through the void like a forgotten piece of celestial shrapnel. There, aboard the United Nations ship Misfit, Commander Eva Rostova tasted the familiar bitterness of recycled coffee and stared at the static-laced display. The Misfit was less a starship and more a flying monument to stubbornness, a relic of humanity's own brutal unification wars. Its hull was a patchwork quilt of mismatched alloys, seared with the scars of forgotten battles. Its fusion core coughed and sputtered like an old man with a smoker's lung, and its corridors smelled of ozone, sweat, and the ghosts of 1,000 past emergencies. It was a perfect reflection of its crew, a collection of veterans, outcasts, and borderline psychotics who had survived humanity's self-destructive tendencies and had the scars to prove it. Her first officer, Gunn, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from granite with a dull knife, leaned over her shoulder. "Anything." Rostova shook her head. "Just the usual whispers and solar farts. The Vex are quiet. The Cathar are still squabbling over their stupid gas giant. And Command is probably debating the new color scheme for dress uniforms." And Gunn grunted, a sound that could mean anything from agreement to profound existential dread. "Good. A quiet day is a day we're not dying." The bridge of the Misfit was a place of grim, practiced routine. Its crew didn't operate with the crisp precision of a storybook fleet. They moved with the loose, cynical efficiency of people who knew that protocols were the first thing to die in a real crisis. They were bound not by formal discipline, but by a shared, unspoken trauma. The memory of turning human weapons on human worlds. A history that had made the Sol Confederacy a pariah state in the galactic community. They were the junkyard dogs, the barbarians at the gate, tolerated only because their brute force technology, crude, kinetic-based weaponry and temperamental fusion drives was brutally effective and pointed away from everyone else. Then, the static broke. A signal, thin and reedy, sliced through the background noise of the universe. It was weak, corrupted, and layered with a form of encryption that made the ship's AI whine in protest. On the main screen, the signal resolved into a location deep inside the Architect's Quarantine Zone 7, a place no ship had entered or exited in 500 years. The xenolinguist, a young prodigy named Ren, who looked perpetually surprised to still be alive, worked furiously, his fingers flying across his console. Fragments of the message began to appear on the screen. Genocidal. Fleet. They consume our light. Is there anyone? Gunn folded his massive arms. Architect Quarantine. Not our problem. Let the cosmic janitors handle their own mess. That wall is there for a reason. He was right, of course. To even approach the quarantine was a violation of a dozen interspecies treaties. To attempt to breach it was an act of cosmic heresy, an invitation for the indifferent architects to simply correct the anomaly. Deletion was their preferred tool of diplomacy. Rostova felt a cold knot of agreement in her gut. She was a soldier, not a savior. Humanity had spent the last century clawing its way back from the brink of self-annihilation. It had no business, and no moral authority, to interfere in the galaxy's ancient squabbles. Log it, she said, her voice flat. Send a Priority 0 report to command. They can kick it upstairs and it can die in a subcommittee. That's the book. She hated the book, but it was what kept them alive. The book said you don't stick your hand in a Vex nest, and you sure as hell don't knock on an architect's door. Ren, however, kept working, coaxing one last coherent sentence from the dying signal before it vanished completely. The words glowed on the screen, stark and mournful. We chose peace, and the silence was our answer. The bridge fell quiet. The usual hum of the life support and the clicking of consoles seemed to fade into a vacuum. Every veteran on that deck, every soul who had lived through the Unification Wars, felt a ghost walk through the room. The phrase was a near-perfect echo of the final, desperate transmission from New Canaan, a human agricultural colony that had been mysteriously wiped out during humanity's Dark Age, a century before the wars. They had pleaded for help as an unknown aggressor descended, and the fractured, warring factions of Earth had been too busy tearing each other apart to respond. New Canaan had died alone, screaming into a void that refused to answer. For Rostova, the words were a physical blow. She was suddenly back on the scorched plains of Mars, the sky red with orbital fire. She saw the face of the civilian governor of Elysium City, a man who had begged her for aid as the orbital cannons of her own faction can prepare to turn his city into glass to deny it to the enemy. She had given the order for strategic necessity, for the greater good, and the governor's last words to her, before his transmission cut out forever, had been, "We begged for a human answer, Commander, and all we got was silence." She closed her eyes, the memory as fresh and raw as it was 30 years ago. The silence had been her answer, too. She opened them, and the cold knot in her gut had ignited into a burning coal. The debate was over. This was no longer about saving some distant, unknown alien species. This was about answering a ghost. It was about paying a debt that had festered in the soul of humanity for over a century. It was about one simple, immutable fact: they would not be the Silence this time. She turned, her gaze sweeping across the faces of her crew gun's stoic mask, Wren's wide-eyed horror, the grim acceptance of the helm officer. They knew. They felt it, too. Rostova keyed the ship-wide comms, her voice devoid of rhetoric or glory, just the cold, hard weight of a choice. This is the commander. High Command Protocol says we log the signal and walk away. The book says we don't go anywhere near that wall. But I remember what it feels like to scream into the void and hear nothing back. We're going in. This is an unsanctioned, illegal, and probably suicidal run. Anyone who wants off can take a shuttle to the nearest outpost. No questions asked. No mark on your record. You have 5 minutes. She cut the feed. The bridge was utterly still. Not a single person moved. Gunn met her gaze. And for the first time that day, the granite of his face cracked into something resembling a grim smile. Took you long enough, Eva, he rumbled. Rostova turned to the helm. The star chart on the main screen glowed. The quarantine zone a shimmering, impossible barrier, a wound on the face of the galaxy. Helm, lay in a course for the Lyra system, she commanded, her voice steady and clear. Plot a breach solution. Brute force. Let's go knock on the wall and show the gods what happens when you cage a monster next to its prey. The Misfit, a ship built from the ashes of humanity's past sins, began to turn, its scarred prow pointing toward an act of cosmic blasphemy, ready to answer a cry for help with the only thing it had left to give its own fury. The journey to Quarantine Zone 7 was a plunge into a deepening, reverent silence. As the Misfit pushed deeper into Architect space, the familiar chatter of the galaxy faded away, star by star, until all that remained was the low, tired hum of their own life support. The quarantine itself was not a distant object to be approached, but a presence that grew, an idea that slowly took over reality. At first, it was a subtle shimmer against the void, a faint, milky iridescence that could be mistaken for a nebula. Then, it became a line, an impossibly straight and perfect curve drawn across the cosmos. Finally, it filled the main view screen, a celestial curtain of liquid light, flowing with colors no human eye was meant to process. It was beautiful, terrifying, and absolute. It did not emit energy. It absorbed it. It did not radiate force. It simply was. The space before it was a graveyard. Dozens of ships, ancient and alien in design, hung suspended in the void, caught like flies in amber. Some were twisted into Escher-like impossibilities, their hulls turned inside out. Others were perfectly preserved, yet aged 1,000,000 years, their metal carapaces crumbling to dust at the slightest touch of the Misfits' long-range scanners. This was not the aftermath of a battle. It was a museum of failures, a silent testament to the folly of challenging a fundamental constant of the universe. Sensor readings are a joke, Wren reported, his voice a strained whisper, as if speaking too loudly might draw the wall's attention. It's not emitting anything. It's a conceptual boundary, a place where the universe's source code has been commented out. I'm getting quantum foam instability, temporal paradox echoes, and a neutrino signature that looks like a scream. In English, Wren. Gunn grumbled from his station, his knuckles white as he gripped the console. It's wrong, Wren said, finally looking up, his eyes wide. All of it. It's a patch on reality, and it doesn't like being touched. Rostova stood at the center of the bridge, a still point in the swirling anxiety. She had spent the journey in a state of cold, meditative focus, reviewing every scrap of data they had on architect constructs, which amounted to little more than myth and terrified conjecture. The plan, such as it was a piece of classic human engineering when faced with an elegant, complex problem. Hit it with a very large, very dumb hammer. "Anya, report," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. The grizzled face of the chief engineer appeared on a secondary screen, framed by a halo of sparking conduits. "The hammer is ready, Commander," Anya said, wiping grease from her brow with the back of her hand. "The fusion core is stable but unhappy. I've bypassed every safety regulator and shunted the primary magnetic containment field into the forward navigational deflector. When we trigger it, we'll be projecting a focused blast of raw, unstable spacetime for about 3.7 seconds. After that, either we're through, or our atoms will be spread so thin the architects won't even need a dustpan." Rostova nodded. "It's a battering ram made of physics." "It's a suicide note with an engine attached," Anya corrected, but there was a wild grin on her face. "It's the most beautifully stupid thing I've ever helped build. We're ready on your mark." Rostova looked back at the wall, at the impossible, silent beauty of it. Her past was a gallery of necessary evils and strategic sacrifices. She had saved humanity from itself by becoming the monster it needed, by making the cold calculations that left cities in ruins and ghosts in her memory. This time, the calculation was different. It wasn't about winning. It was about showing up. "Ren, you find me a seam," she ordered. "A weak point. A place where the patch is stitched a little looser than the rest." Ren's fingers became a blur. He wasn't looking for energy fluctuations. He was searching for imperfections in the pattern, moments where the impossible colors of the wall flickered with a shade of simple, physical light. "There," he said, pointing. "A transient photonic emission. It's like a knot in the thread. For a nanosecond, it almost obeys the laws of physics. It's our target." Rostova took a deep breath, the recycled air tasting of ozone and finality. "Helm, bring us in, gun. Get damage control on a hair trigger. Anya, give 'em hell." Yison the Misfit crept forward, its battered hull groaning in protest as it entered the wall's immediate influence. The ship's internal gravity fluctuated wildly, and for a heart-stopping moment, the entire bridge crew was pinned to the ceiling before being slammed back into their seats. The lights flickered, not off and on, but between the ship's harsh white emergency lighting and a soft, pastoral sunlight that smelled of cut grass and ozone. A voice, soft and feminine, whispered from the comms, speaking a language no one understood, but everyone recognized as a lullaby. "It's in our heads," Gunn roared, shaking his head as if to dislodge a fly. "Psychic attack. Ignore it. Focus on your stations." Rostova felt it too, a memory of her childhood home on a terraformed Martian plain, the red dust storms raging outside while she sat safe in her mother's arms. It was a perfect, beautiful lie, an offering of peace before oblivion. She shoved it down, burying it under layers of scar tissue and regret. "Anya, now!" she screamed. The ship shuddered violently, a deep, bone-jarring groan that vibrated up from the deck plates. From the nose of the Misfit, a beam of pure, chaotic energy erupted, not light, but a lance of distorted reality. The universe bent around it. Where the beam struck the wall, the shimmering colors recoiled, boiling away to reveal a churning, gray nothingness beneath. For a single, eternal second, there was a hole, a raw, open wound in the fabric of the cosmos. "Full thrust," Rostova commanded. The misfit lunged forward, plunging into the breach. The transition was not a movement. It was a violation. Time shattered. Rostova saw the birth of the misfit in the orbital shipyards of Titan, saw its final, heat-death decay in the heart of a dying star, and lived 1,000 lives in the seconds between. Gunn screamed as his hands briefly became clouds of glowing gas before snapping back into flesh and bone. Ren watched the ship's computer live and die 1,000,000,000 times, its core processes cycling through every possible permutation of its own existence. The ship itself screamed, a chorus of tearing metal, exploding circuits, and the sound of physics breaking down under protest. Hallways compressed into single points and then stretched into infinity. The mess hall was briefly exposed to hard vacuum. The tables and chairs flash freezing before the hull stitched itself back together. Then, silence. A sudden, jarring, absolute quiet that was more deafening than the chaos that preceded it. The misfit drifted, broken and bleeding, in the calm of normal space. The wall was behind them, a shimmering, indifferent scar in their wake. On the bridge, sparks rained down from the ceiling. Half the consoles were dark, and a gaping hole in the aft section showed a star field where the tactical station used to be. Every alert on the board was screaming red. Hull breaches on 6 decks, life support failing. The fusion core was in emergency shutdown, running on nothing but fumes and Anya's sheer force of will. But they were through. Gunn was the first to recover, hauling himself up and keying the damage control net. "Report," he barked, his voice raw. "Containment fields on decks 3 and 4 are gone. We're venting atmosphere. Seal it now. Medical teams to the engine room. Anya's down. Get me a power reading. Damn it." Rostova pushed herself to her feet, her body a symphony of pain. A piece of shrapnel was embedded in her shoulder, but she ignored the warm trickle of blood running down her arm when I stumbled to the main view screen, which was miraculously still active, though flickering badly. "Ren," she rasped, "show me." Ren, pale and shaking, typed a single command. The screen flickered, then stabilized, displaying the view before them. They had made it. They were inside the quarantine, in the Lyra system. And they were too late. Below them lay the planet Lyra, a world of stunning, crystalline beauty. But it was a beauty that was being devoured. The Vex fleet was not a fleet at all. It was a single, large, sprawling organism of biomechanical horror that encased the planet in a web of living, pulsating cables, and weapon emplacements. It was a parasite latched onto the soul of a world. As they watched, a thick, gray beam of energy descended from the web and touched one of the planet's glowing cities. There was no explosion, no fire. The city simply dissolved. The crystalline spires, the delicate architecture, the millions of lumen within, all collapsed into a shrieking, gray torrent that was then sucked back up the beam into the waiting maw of the Vex. Rostova watched a civilization die in real time, the light of their souls extinguished in a silent, efficient harvest. And as the last of the city was consumed, the entire Vex superstructure seemed to turn its attention toward them. 1,000 glowing red optics, and each the size of a battleship, swiveled in unison to fixate on the small, broken human ship that had just blasphemed its way into their private larder. They were alone. They were crippled, and the monster had just noticed them. The Vex did not respond with cannons or torpedoes. Such crude instruments of destruction were beneath them. Their response was that of a body noticing a splinter slow, methodical, and utterly without malice. From the pulsating web of living metal that surrounded Lyra, a swarm of smaller organisms detached themselves and began to move toward the misfit. They were not ships. They were biomechanical antibodies, shaped like obsidian shards with trailing filaments of red energy. They moved in a silent, coordinated swarm, their intent not to destroy, but to investigate, to sample, to understand, and then to incorporate. Point defense cannons are online. Gunn's voice was a low growl, but they're firing at 50% capacity. We're a tin can in a shooting gallery. On the view screen, the swarm drew closer. They were beautiful in their horrifying symmetry, a cloud of sentient scalpels coming to dissect them. Rostova gripped the command chair, the shrapnel in her shoulder a dull, grounding ache. They couldn't fight. They couldn't run. "Helm, find us a shadow," she ordered, her voice cutting through the rising panic. "Get us into the debris field of one of those dead ships. Power down everything non-essential. We're going to play dead." It was a desperate, humiliating tactic, hiding among the failures of others. But it was all they had. The misfit limped toward the carcass of a vast, crystalline vessel that had been twisted into a corkscrew. Its engine sputtered and died as the helm officer cut all power, plunging the bridge into the stark red glow of emergency lighting. They drifted, a ghost among ghosts, as the Vex swarm swept past, their energy trails bathing the bridge in an eerie, fleeting light. One of the probes slowed, its single red optic fixing on them, and for a heart-stopping eternity, Rostova was certain they had been found. Then, as if dismissing them as inanimate junk, it turned and rejoined the swarm, continuing its silent, inexorable patrol. The collective breath held on the bridge was released in a ragged sigh. They were hidden, but they were still dying. The ship was a wreck, bleeding air and energy into the void. "Anya," Rostova said into her comms, her voice tight. "Talk to me." The engineer's face appeared on the monitor, pale and slick with sweat. A medic was holding a plasma welder to a gash on her side, and she winced but didn't cry out. "The core is too orso." "Resting," Anya grunted, her voice strained. "The breach destabilized the magnetic containment. If I try to restart it now, the reaction will go critical and will become a very small but very brief star. I need to get down there and manually realign the primary injectors. It's delicate. And if I sneeze, we all vaporize." Rostova's blood ran cold. A manual realignment was a procedure of last resort, a mechanic's prayer whispered over the heart of a god. "What do you need?" she asked. "Time." Anya coughed, a pained grin on her face. "And for Gunn to stop shouting about containment fields in my ear. Tell him I'm working on it." Rostova relayed the message, and for a moment, the brutal reality of their situation settled over them. They were trapped behind enemy lines, in a ship that was a ticking bomb, with their only hope for escape resting on the steady hands of a wounded engineer performing open-heart surgery on a fusion reactor. The silence was broken by Ren. He hadn't moved from his console, his face illuminated by the glow of cascading data. "Commander," he said, his voice hushed with a dawning, terrible awe. "I've been analyzing the Vex assimilation beam. It's not just a weapon. It's a broadcast." He brought up a complex waveform on the main screen. It was a chaotic mess of overlapping frequencies, but beneath it all was a steady, rhythmic pulse. The lumens' unique biology, their ability to perceive space-time folds. It's a quantum resonance. The Vex are harvesting that resonance, but they can't replicate it perfectly. Their technology is too ordered, too sterile. The assimilation process is inefficient. It creates this feedback, this harmonic dissonance. He pointed to a jagged, angry spike in the data stream. It's like they're trying to record a perfect symphony using a microphone full of static. He then overlaid a second waveform, this one generated from the energy readings of the Misfits core during the breach. It was a chaotic, ugly, brutal spike of pure noise, a scream of raw power. But when he laid it over the Vex data, something incredible happened. The two chaotic spikes were near perfect opposites. Where the Vex signal peaked, theirs troughed. They canceled each other out. "Our engine," Ren whispered, his eyes wide. "Our crude, inefficient, brute force fusion core. Its energy signature is a near-perfect counter-frequency to the Vex harvesting process. We're the static that can silence their symphony." A new, insane possibility began to dawn on the bridge. They didn't have a weapon, but they might be something far more dangerous, a poison. They couldn't destroy the Vex, but they might be able to disrupt the harvest, to make the very thing the Vex had come for, the Lumen's genetic gift, indigestible. It was a plan born of pure desperation, a strategy that involved turning their ship's greatest weakness into its most potent weapon. As if summoned by this revelation, a new signal cut through the silence. It wasn't the broad, desperate scream from before, but a tight beam whisper, focused and deliberate, aimed directly at them. It was Kalen. "I saw you." The translated text scrolled across Ren's screen. "You tore a hole in heaven. You are not architects. You are not Vex. Who are you?" The last archivist was alive, hidden somewhere on the dying world below. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar feeling, sparked in Rostova's chest. "We're the answer you asked for," she transmitted back, her fingers flying across the command interface. "We're late. We're broken. But we're here. Where are you?" A set of coordinates appeared, pointing to a location deep beneath the dissolved ruins of the capital city. "They are preparing to harvest the central archive." Kalen's message continued. "The core of our knowledge, our history, our genetic code. If they take it, the lumens cease to exist, even in memory." "Can you stop them?" Rostova looked at the bleeding ship around her, at the faces of her exhausted crew, and then at the image of the Vex web, a god of hunger wrapped around a dying world. The odds were not astronomical, they were a statistical impossibility. But the question wasn't, can you? It was, will you? She looked at Gunn, who simply nodded, the grim acceptance back on his face. She looked at Ren, who was already mapping the coordinates. "Anya," she said, "Oi," her voice ringing with a newfound clarity. "How long until that core is back online?" Anya's voice came back, strained but fierce. "Give me 20 minutes to keep us from exploding. Give me 30 to make it sing." Rostova stood tall, the pain in her shoulder forgotten, replaced by a cold, burning purpose. This was her Elysium City, her new Canaan. This was the moment where she could finally give a different answer. "Helm, as soon as that core is lit, you take us down," she commanded, her voice the steel of a blade being drawn. "We are going to dive straight into that monster's throat. Ren, you will modulate the core's energy output to match Kalen's location. We're going to turn this entire ship into a tuning fork from hell and shatter their harvest right at the source." The misfit was no longer hiding. A new plan was forged in the crucible of their desperation. They would not be the silence. They would be the noise, the discordant, chaotic, unapologetically human scream that would either save a species or be the last sound they ever made. The descent into Lyra's atmosphere was a controlled fall into hell. 30 minutes to the second. Anya's voice, ragged but triumphant, crackled over the comms. The heart is beating. She's unstable. She's spitting radiation like a cornered cat. But she's online. The moment the fusion core reignited, the misfit lit up like a flare in the darkness, and the Vex's indifference vanished. The entire superstructure, the planet-spanning web of biomechanical horror, contracted like a startled muscle. Every weapon, every sensor, every single biomechanical antibody turned inward, focusing on the singular, audacious threat that was now screaming towards its heart. The ship bucked and groaned as the first wave of Vex energy beams struck, not with explosive force, but with a corrosive, peeling effect. Hull plates glowed cherry red and then sublimated into vapor. The bridge was a cacophony of alarms and the steady, rhythmic thud of the point defense cannons firing until their barrels began to melt. "Shields at 30% and failing," Gunn bellowed, his hands a blur as he rerouted power, sacrificing non-essential systems to feed the flickering energy barriers. "They're not trying to blow us up, they're trying to flay us alive." Rostova was strapped into the command chair, her eyes locked on the view screen. "Veil." The crystalline surface of Lyra rushed up to meet them, a breathtaking landscape of shattered beauty, interspersed with the glowing, intact cities where the gray, dead zones where the Vex had already harvested, cancerous scars on the skin of the world. "Ren, are you locked onto Kalen's signal?" she demanded, her voice strained against the G-forces. "I have him," Ren replied, his knuckles white on his console. "He's deep, directly beneath the largest harvesting beam. We're on the right trajectory, but the feedback from the beam is playing hell with my modulation calculations. It's like trying to tune a violin in the middle of a hurricane." On the screen, the main Vex harvesting beam filled their view, a pillar of swirling gray energy that plunged from orbit into the ruins of the Lumen capital. It was a vortex of cosmic consumption, and they were flying straight into it. "Keep her steady," Rostova murmured, more to herself than to the helm officer, who was fighting the controls as if wrestling with a sea monster. The ship screamed in protest as it hit the outer edge of the beam's energy field. The lights on the bridge flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness, save for the terrifying, gray light pouring through the view screen. The inertial dampeners failed, and a wave of crushing gravity slammed them all into their seats. For a moment that stretched into an agonizing eternity. The misfit was caught, tumbled, and torn at by the raw forces of the harvest. Then, with a final, shuddering lurch, they were through the storm wall and inside the eye of the hurricane. The turbulence ceased, replaced by a strange, unnerving calm. They were flying down the throat of the beam, a tunnel of swirling, screaming energy. Ghostly images of Lumen faces, twisted in silent agony, flickered in the gray torrent around them. This was the raw data stream of a dying race, the content of their souls being uploaded for consumption. The sight was so profoundly obscene that for a moment, the battle-hardened crew could only stare in horrified silence. Rostova was the first to break the spell. "Ren, now, do it now!" Ren's hands flew across his console, his face illuminated by the eerie glow. "Modulation sequence initiated. I'm broadcasting our core's energy signature directly into the harvest stream. I'm poisoning the data." The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The moment the Misfits' chaotic, dirty energy signature hit the Vex's pristine data stream, the entire beam convulsed. The smooth, orderly flow of energy stuttered, corrupted by the raw, unpredictable noise of human technology. The ghostly faces in the torrent warped, their silent screams turning into shrieks of digital feedback. The entire Vex superstructure shuddered in sympathy. On the bridge, consoles exploded in showers of sparks as the feedback loop surged back through their own systems. The ship's AI, which had been fighting to maintain stability, let out a single, synthesized cry of agony before its core logic corrupted and it went silent. Gunn wrestled with a fire extinguisher, putting out a blaze that had erupted from a power conduit. "It's working!" he yelled, his face blackened with soot. "They're choking on us, deep beneath the surface, in the last sanctuary of his people." Kalen felt the change, the psychic pressure of the harvest, a constant, crushing weight on his mind, suddenly faltered. The Vex's song of consumption was disrupted by a new, violent, and utterly defiant noise. It was the sound of rage, of pain, of stubborn, irrational survival. It was the sound of humanity. He looked at the final data core of the Lumen, a crystal repository containing the essence of 1,000,000 years of history and art. And for the first time in cycles, he felt a flicker of something beyond despair. Rostova watched the readouts, her heart pounding against her ribs. The Vex beam was flickering, destabilizing. They had given Kalen an opening, but their victory was being measured in seconds. The misfit was coming apart around them. The feedback was tearing through their systems like a virus, and the core itself was redlining, the containment fields flickering like dying candles. "Anya," Rostova shouted, "I need more power for the final push. You ask for more power and you'll get a starship-sized grenade." Anya screamed back over the comms, her voice frayed with exhaustion and pain. "The injectors are melting. The reactor housing is about to crack. This is it." "Eva, we've given all she's got." Rostova knew what that meant. They had done what they came to do. They had disrupted the harvest, given the Lumen a chance, however slim, but they had paid for it with their ship and their lives. They were in a death spiral, trapped in a collapsing energy beam with a critical reactor. There was no escape. "Gunn," she said, her voice strangely calm. "Begin evacuation protocols. Launch any escape pods that are still functional. Get as many of the crew out as you can." Gunn turned to stare at her, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "And go where?" "Eva, into the middle of that swarm. That's not an evacuation. It's a death sentence. We stay together. We die together." Before Rostova could argue, a new element entered the equation. With the main harvesting beam disrupted, the Vex superstructure began to reconfigure itself. It was adapting. Massive tendrils of living metal began to retract from the planet's surface and coalesce around the central beam, forming a solid, armored cocoon. They were attempting to contain the corruption, to isolate the misfit and crush it within a closing fist of biomechanical flesh. The tunnel of energy they were in began to narrow. The walls were closing in. This was it, the end of the line. Rostova looked at the faces of her crew, illuminated by the red glow of the dying bridge. They were terrified, exhausted, and bleeding, but not one of them was looking at the escape pods. Their eyes were on her, waiting for the final order. She felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost brought her to tears. They were a crew of misfits and monsters, the forgotten refuse of a brutal war, but they had crossed the universe to answer a stranger's cry for help, and they had not flinched in the face of a god. "All right," she said, her voice soft but clear. "So, we die together." She turned to the helm officer, whose console was one of the few still active. If we're going to die, we're going to die loud. Take us deeper. Ram the central conduit at the base of the beam. If our core goes critical at the heart of their network, we won't just disrupt the harvest. We might just give the whole damn thing a fatal case of indigestion. The helm officer grinned, a bloody, defiant smile. Aye, Commander. Full speed ahead and damn the consequences. The Misfit, broken and burning, plunged deeper into the closing throat of the Vex, its dying heart a bomb aimed at the heart of the monster, ready to give one last, glorious, human answer. The final dive of the Misfit was an exercise in controlled annihilation. Metal screamed, not with the transient shriek of tearing armor, but with the deep, resonant groan of a structure surrendering its very existence. The narrowing cocoon of Vex biomechanics was no longer scraping the hull, but grinding it away, shearing off entire sections of the ship in incandescent showers of sparks. On the bridge, the universe had compressed into a singular, violent reality. The rhythmic, deafening thud of their own failing systems was the only percussion. The crimson glow of emergency lights, the only illumination, painting the grim faces of the crew in shades of blood and fire. The helm officer, Gia, was a study in stillness amidst the chaos. Her hands weren't fighting the controls anymore. They were guiding them with the delicate precision of a surgeon making the final, fatal incision. Every tremor that shook the ship, every explosive report from a rupturing conduit seemed to flow around her, leaving her untouched in her bubble of pure focus. She was no longer flying a starship. She was aiming a soul. Rostova, strapped so tightly into her command chair that the restraints dug into her flesh, felt the end approaching not as a terror, but as a strange and profound clarity. The ghosts of Elysium City and 100 other strategic necessities that had haunted her sleep for decades were silent now, awed into submission by the sheer scale of this final act. This was not a cold calculation for the greater good. It was a purely emotional, irrational, and utterly human declaration that some things were worth dying for. This was the answer she had owed the universe for a lifetime of silences. Reactor containment is gone. Anya's voice, stripped of all its usual sarcasm and bravado, came over the comms. A flat statement of fact. She's a supernova in a bottle. Eva, the bottle's about to break. Understood. Anya. It's been an honor, Rostova replied, her own voice steady. The honor's been all mine, Commander. Impact in 10 seconds, Gia announced, her tone as level as if she were announcing their arrival at a starbase. 9. Deep beneath the surface, in the humming silence of the central archive, Kalen felt the Misfit's final, desperate plunge as a spike of pure, chaotic energy. He could feel the imminent, catastrophic failure of their fusion core, a force of raw, untamed power that would sterilize this entire sector of his world. In that moment, he saw the human strategy for what it was, a glorious, insane, suicidal act of cosmic vandalism. They would not allow the Vex to have this world, even if it meant destroying it themselves. He looked upon the great crystal data core, the repository of every lumen thought, every artistic masterpiece, every scientific discovery. It was the complete, perfect, ordered soul of his people. His purpose had been to protect it, to preserve it as a memory. But what was a memory without a future? The humans, in their barbarism, had shown him another way. They did not fight with logic or elegance. They fought with their entire, messy, broken being. And in their chaos, he saw not an imperfection, but a different kind of power. A power that could break patterns, not just follow them. With a final, silent prayer to the ancestors whose entire existence was encoded in the crystal before him, Kalen made his choice. He would not preserve the past. He would sacrifice it to create a future, placing his hands on the cool, smooth surface of the data core. He did not erect a shield or attempt to flee. He opened the floodgates. He took the perfect, harmonious symphony of 1,000,000 years of lumen consciousness and broadcast it directly into the heart of the most chaotic, violent, and unstable energy source he had ever encountered, the dying soul of the misfit. On the bridge, Gia counted down. 3, 2, as the world did not end in fire. It was reborn in light and a wave of pure, white energy, impossibly bright and utterly silent, erupted from the engineering deck. It was not the chaotic blast of a critical reactor. It was something else entirely. It was structured. It had texture. It had a voice. The wave washed over the bridge, and instead of incinerating the crew, it passed through them, rewriting their reality. Rostova gasped, her mind torn open. She was no longer on the bridge of a dying ship. She was standing on a crystalline shore, watching a binary sunrise paint a sky of liquid amethyst. She felt the slow, deliberate joy of the first lumen artist as they carved a star chart into a living gem. She experienced the profound, collective peace of a civilization that had conquered its base instincts and chosen harmony. And woven into this perfect, ordered tapestry, she felt the burning, chaotic thread of her own humanity. She saw the governor of Elysium City, but this time, his face was not twisted in accusation, but in a strange, sad understanding. She felt the weight of her sins not as a burden to be carried, but as the ballast that had given her the strength to reach this moment. The song of the lumen and the scream of humanity did not clash. They found a harmony, a chord of cosmic truth that resonated in the space between order and chaos, peace and war, sacrifice and survival. Gun, the stoic soldier, was brought to his knees, tears streaming down his face. His mind, which had always seen the universe in terms of angles of attack and kill probabilities, was suddenly flooded with the elegant, irrefutable beauty of cosmic mathematics. He saw the Vex not as an enemy, but as a flawed equation, a being of perfect logic that had failed to account for the irrational variable of hope. He saw the kinetic fury of his own ship's cannons and the patient, silent growth of a crystal as two equally valid expressions of existence. The rigid categories that had defined his life dissolved into a single, overwhelming, and beautiful whole. Ren, meanwhile, was laughing, a sound of pure, unadulterated intellectual ecstasy. He was not seeing images or feeling emotions. He was perceiving the source code. The fusion of the lumen data and the human reactor core had created a new form of energy, a living paradox that obeyed no known laws of physics because it was actively writing new ones. It was a conceptual weapon, a logic bomb that didn't destroy its target, but forced it to evolve. Outside the ship, the Vex Hive mind experienced this new song as an existential attack. Its entire existence was predicated on the assimilation of predictable, quantifiable data. This new energy was unquantifiable. It was a statement that was simultaneously true and false, an answer to a question that had never been asked. The attempt to process it was like trying to divide by zero. The corruption spread through the superstructure with visible speed. The sleek, black, utilitarian metal began to sprout fractal, crystalline patterns. The thousands of glowing red optics that had stared with cold, logical hunger shattered, reforming into kaleidoscopic lenses that reflected the impossible colors of the architect's wall. Tendrils of living cable that had been designed to harvest life began to weave themselves into intricate, beautiful, and utterly pointless sculptures. The hive mind was not dying. It was being born, thrust violently into a new, more complex state of consciousness, a universe where logic and beauty were not mutually exclusive. The harvest had ended, replaced by a spontaneous, system-wide act of creation. The song, having broken its cage, sought an escape. Kalen, his life force and the last vestiges of his people's power pouring into the Nexus event, gave it one. With the last beat of his fading consciousness, he performed the ultimate act of lumen science. He did not open a door in space-time. He showed the noob and nascent consciousness the idea of a door. And the consciousness is in its first act, right? Created it. The universe around the misfit folded. The central conduit of the Vex beam became the shimmering, iridescent mouth of a tunnel through reality. There was no gut-wrenching G-force, no temporal distortion. There was only a single, silent, graceful step from one place to another. The misfit slid through the fold and emerged into the profound, familiar silence of empty space. The transition was so gentle that for a long moment, the crew, still reeling from their shared apotheosis, didn't even realize it had happened. The violent red of the emergency lights had been replaced by the soft, distant starlight of home. The deafening roar was gone, replaced by the faint, electrical hum of a ship running on its last dregs of auxiliary power. Rostova was the first to break the spell, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The memory of the song was already fading, leaving behind not details, but a profound, indelible emotional imprint. "Report," she whispered, the single word an immense effort. Gunn staggered to his feet, wiping the tears from his face with the back of a soot-stained hand. He ran a systems check, his movements slow, dreamlike. "All systems, J, non-responsive. The core is a solid block of inert metal. Life support is on battery. We have maybe 12 hours. But the hull is intact. We're not venting." He looked at the main view screen, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. "We're outside. We're on the other side of the wall." As if on cue, the wound they had torn in the quarantine, the ugly, brute force hole they had punched in the fabric of reality, shimmered and closed. The liquid light flowed back together, leaving a flawless, unbroken surface, as if they had never been there. The architects had tidied up, erasing the evidence of their transgression. "What did we do?" Ren breathed, staring at his dark console. "We didn't destroy it. We changed it. We forced it to become something else." The full weight of their actions settled upon them. They had not won a war. They had accidentally midwifed the birth of a new form of consciousness, a hybrid entity of Vex logic, lumen grace, and human chaos. And they had left it locked inside the architect's cosmic prison. They had not brought an end to a conflict, but a beginning to something far stranger and more unpredictable. Rostova looked at the faces of her crew, saw the shared, secret apocalypse reflected in their eyes. They would go home to face a court-martial. They had violated a dozen treaties and committed an act of cosmic heresy. They had no proof, no evidence, nothing but a story that would sound like madness. But they were alive, and they were whole. "Helm," she said, her voice finding its familiar steel, though it was now tempered with something new, something that felt like wisdom. "Set a course for the edge. Use the navigation pulsar. Go quiet. Let's go home." The Misfit, a crippled, silent ghost of a ship, began its slow, painful journey back toward human space. It was a vessel returning from an impossible shore, its holds filled not with spoils of war, but with the memory of a song. They had screamed into the void, and for one brilliant, impossible moment, the void had sung back,